This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Go Wide, Reimagining the Landscape of Theology by Martha Elias Downey. This book invites readers to expand their theological, spiritual, and relational horizons by sidestepping the notions of hierarchy and verticality. Go Wide employs the lens of spaciousness to explore biblical stories, theological concepts, and the nature of God, showing how biblical narratives often disrupt the status quo. Pick up Go Wide, Reimagining the Landscape of Theology, now available on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast. I am here with a Smarty Pants episode. I am getting to talk to Jeffrey Richards today. He is working now on his PhD in psychology. His dissertation is on religious trauma and complex PTSD. And right now he's also serving at a church in St. Clair's, called St. Clair's. It's in Tyler, Texas. And he runs a religious trauma group on Tuesdays. If you're actually in the area, you might want to check it out. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being on the Unbelief Podcast.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And so one of the things that I'd love for you just to give us an explanation of what complex PTSD actually is.
Well, complex PTSD is more of like an ongoing trauma. So when we talk about complex, it's more of, the trauma that's happened is so severe that I'm basically chronically living with it. So you'll see that a lot with people who maybe came out of abusive relationships or, combat situations where they'll end up with complex PTSD.
And how is that different from just standard PTSD?
Complex, well, post-traumatic stress disorder is more centered on certain incidents, where this can be, where complex is more of like the overall. So, for example, if I'm looking at an abusive relationship, it's not just the one incident that caused PTSD. It's this overall situation.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So, what I'd love to do is just talk about religious trauma. A lot of people who listen to this podcast have expressed that they have religious trauma, and not just that. A lot of them end up saying things like, "Oh, I didn't realize this was a thing," and I definitely experienced that. And so, can you just tell me a little bit about what religious trauma is and how people experience that?
Well, you make a good point that a lot of people don't realize that they've had it. It wasn't even something that I necessarily named prior to a year ago, and now you're hearing it all the time, and with a lot of these influencers, but a lot of the progressive influencers. But it's an under-researched topic. Okay. So, a lot of times, a lot of the research is pointed toward the LGBTQ plus community. Right. And obviously, there is religious trauma there because we see people from the fundamentalist groups that weaponize the Bible against that group. But I don't think it stops there. I know it doesn't stop there. The doctrine of hell, for example, can be used to weaponize or be weaponized against groups of people. Purity culture can be weaponized against groups of people. We're seeing now the doctrine of how the household's supposed to be structured in regards to the male being the head of the household, and then everything kind of flowing up from there. We're seeing that being weaponized and warped. Doug Wilson's a great example of that. The pastor from Moscow, Indiana, that was just on CNN recently. So we're seeing, it's not just this one particular demographic, but it's really all encompassing of anytime a doctrine is used or a doctrine is warped to be weaponized against a group of people, it causes trauma, and that leads to religious trauma.
What do you mean by weaponized?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I first moved to Tyler, the majority of 3 out of 5 of my kids are LGBTQ plus. And when I first came to Tyler, I went to my first Pride event. And there was a local church that showed up. And it wasn't about, hey, I want to engage you in conversation. I believe something differently than you, which, we can have that conversation. I don't think the scholarship is on your side, but we can have that conversation.
Sure.
But it wasn't about that. It was about name calling. It was about almost like the schoolyard antics. Expanding on that, since I've been serving in St. Clair's, I work a lot of different Pride events and a lot of different LGBTQ plus centered events here in Tyler. And there's one I did, the Rainbow Market. The same thing happened. This group, this local church came up. They started calling the church a synagogue of Satan. They started utilizing Bible verses to say that we were wicked people.
Right.
So it really wasn't about engaging in conversation. It was about, I believe I'm right, and I'm going to use whatever I have at my disposal to bring you down and to elevate myself over you. And that's what I view as weaponizing.
Okay. And so, but being at a Pride event, I feel like it's easy to dismiss those people. I've been to several Pride events as well. And so, I don't imagine that, the random person sees the church holding signs as necessarily traumatized. And it sounds like that wouldn't be a complex trauma. But I get the like weaponization. But now how does that weaponization transform from the unhinged people holding the signs that you dismiss to religious trauma in a person's life?
Well, and I think you're right that just the average unhinged person probably doesn't affect these individuals. However, it's when the average unhinged person is in bed with politics and has the ability to affect your life. We're starting to see that right now with the overturning or the potential of overturning same-sex marriages. We're starting to see that with there was a CNN interview I just referenced a little bit ago with Doug Wilson, where members of his church were saying that there needs to be an adjustment to the amendment to overturn women's right to vote. I used to watch things like The Handmaid's Tale and think, hey, that's not realistic. And it's becoming very realistic at this point.
Yeah.
And so when you're living in that constant fear of knowing that it's not just sitting on a street corner holding a sign, but they have real backing to affect your life. I've talked to LGBTQ plus people here that are married that are scared of what that's going to end up doing.
Oh yeah. Same.
To their marriages, to the fact that even if it's at the state level, if they travel to Texas and they're hospitalized, they're traveling to Texas for business and they're hospitalized, can their spouse visit them?
Right.
And so that creates real trauma when somebody is actively trying to destroy your household.
Okay. And so you don't even have to be involved in those churches to experience the trauma.
No, you don't at all.
Now, so that's like experiencing the trauma. I'm curious, when you've experienced trauma, does that necessarily turn into this diagnosable, this diagnosis of PTSD?
So and that's why it's under researched, because And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to do the research. So there is a religious trauma scale, the RSS-5, that just recently came out. So my goal is to take that validated tool and other validated tools and to find out definitively, does religious trauma lead to complex PTSD? Based on a little bit of research that's out there, it looks like it potentially does. But it's under research. So I can't definitively say that's the case, but that's where my research is going to lead me.
Now let's talk about when you are a queer, excuse me. Let's talk about when you are a queer person that is involved in one of those churches, right? You are a member of one of these churches, maybe even not the most extreme one, not the one that was on CNN, but tell me about how you experienced trauma there.
So with me, of course, I'm involved in a affirming church here at St. Clair's. So I'm more of an ally than a part of the community. However, 3 of my 5 kids are LGBTQ+. And that's actually what led to me wanting to study religious trauma. At that time, I didn't know there was a name for it. But really try to understand the doctrine is because my oldest daughter, when she came out as gay, she was going to a mega church in McKinney, Texas. And it was all about trying to fix her. It was all about, and of course she lived at the time, she lived with her biological father. But, it was new for them because they were involved in the church. They didn't know how to navigate it. With us, it was, okay, cool. She came out as gay, but with them, they had a hard time navigating it. So, they tried to do what they felt was the right thing. And then the church got involved and really was, trying to fix the situation. And it got
how
to a
do
point where she was very
try to
fascinated with
fix
theology.
the situation?
She ended up, what was it?
And how do churches try to fix the situation?
Well, through therapy. That was the big thing with her, was like, hey, let's get you into pastoral counseling. I wouldn't say it was traditionally, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh gosh, it was really big 10, 15 years ago. I don't think it's done now, but I don't think it was.
Is it conversion therapy?
Yeah, conversion therapy. That's what the word I was looking for.
Tell me in these pastoral conversations, like what happens there? Like what happens in those pastoral? You said, I think you called it pastoral counseling,
right?
What is said? What do they do for people who haven't ever been there or heard that? Like trying to understand what's going on. What is said?
So what they'll do is they'll use, verses from Leviticus. That's really their baseline. Verses from Leviticus, Paul, and they'll use that to say, hey, this is the baseline. Like what you're doing is essentially wrong. Who you are is essentially wrong. Who you are biologically, neurologically is basically wrong. And, we need to fix this by turning you toward the gospel in a way that's pleasing to Christ. And so,
what do they, how do they do that? Like when you say turning towards the gospel, I mean, that's a fine, churchy term. What do they tell those people to do?
Well, they tell them to turn away from sin because based on those baseline scriptures that I just mentioned, they view it as sin. So they tell them to turn away from sin.
And how do you turn away from the sin of homosexuality?
Well, you can't. I mean,
according
right?
to them, like
to
what,
them.
like
well,
if somebody goes in, like, and they say,
of taking that temptation away. Whether it's a friend group or whether it's people that are affirming to you. I'll give you an example. There is we've had members from this church that have come from other churches. And what those churches will do, there's one I just read recently. It was a Baptist church. This member, decided, hey, I'm coming out. This church has said they're not going to be affirming. And so I'm going to go to St. Clair's. And so when they made that transition, the church sent them a letter saying, we are going to put you before the disciplinary board. And we are going to excommunicate you from this church. And she's like, there's no need.
Right.
I'm leaving your church and going to this church. And they sent her letters. They pressured her to turn back. Wow. They said that she was going to a church that was the synagogue of Satan.
Wow.
And so it's this strong language that they'll use to say, hey, these are the wrong people for you. You need to come back to people who actually care about you and care about your eternal soul, quote unquote. Yeah. I mean, these are words that they use, eternal soul. So,
wow. Okay, so when I think it's really clear how being a queer person, that is your identity, right? It's something so deep and so core that that once you sort of lay that out, it makes sense how that is traumatizing. Can you talk about purity culture? Like how, like specifically how does purity culture create religious trauma?
Well, and I've seen situations where, young women who are PKs, pastors' kids, they'll be involved in relationships at 16, 17, 18 years old, right. But it's outside the confines of marriage, right? And I've seen situations where pastors have been like, you're affecting my career. You're affecting me. Uh-huh. I've actually seen conversations like this happen. Like, you're affecting me because of because of what you're doing. And so that's part of it. Also, this whole idea of you have to be careful what you wear around women, have to be careful what they wear around men, right. Because men can't control themselves. Right. I've heard stories about that in religious trauma where, women have had to grow up with this understanding of they have to be careful of what they do or say or behave around men because they don't want to cause their brother, quote unquote, to stumble. And it's created trauma and even how they relate to people today, right? Because that's been ingrained in their brains.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering if you would be willing, and I don't want you to betray any confidence, of course.
Right.
But I wonder if you might tell us, a couple of stories of people. I find that sometimes it is hearing somebody else's story, the process that they went through, the things that they were taught, how they came through and realized. I wonder if you might tell us, a longer story of a couple of people who experienced religious trauma and sort of tell us the story from when they were being traumatized to, afterwards.
Absolutely. So honestly, probably the best example is the one I just was just sharing with you. And she's a member of my group, but she grew up. The young lady who just recently came out in the Baptist church. She grew up in the Baptist church, got married. To somebody of the opposite sex because she felt like that's what she was supposed to do.
Right.
And, I can't really speak to whether that was a good marriage or a bad marriage. I really don't know.
Right.
But they were married up until his death. And she realized at that point in time, hey, you know what? This is not who I am. It's never been who I was. And so she did the right thing and came out to, to everybody, including her church. And that's when, the letters started. I would call it harassment because it was even after she said, hey, we're apparently on two different wavelengths theologically. I'm going to go to this church. Right. It didn't matter. They were continuing to send letters of, we're worried about you. We're worried about your soul. We need you to come back. Here's a list of Bible verses. And, and then, like I said, they were just like, hey, we're going to excommunicate you. These are the things we're going to do. We're going to have a meeting to discuss you. And she kept saying, there's no need to have a meeting.
Right.
And they would continue. It's like they wanted to have the last word.
Yeah,
like she would say, this is over, we're done. And they would come back with something else because they wanted to control the narrative. And it was almost like it was an abusive relationship. It's no different than if you're with a spouse that's abusive and you're trying to separate from that spouse. They want to have the last word because they want to exert that control over you. And it was, I was watching that. I even used that analogy with her. It's like, this is a classic abusive relationship. Right. No matter how many times you're trying to pull out, they continue to exert that control.
Pull you back in. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious, like, for people who are listening to the podcast, what kind of things, like, how would they know if they've experienced religious trauma?
And I think, again, that's difficult because it's such a new thing. But I believe that if you are listening and you're like, hey, I've really felt like I've been in, churches who, here's a really good, we talked about this before in my religious trauma group, but, churches where you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to question doctrine. You're not allowed to question, the Bible. You're not allowed to bring up biblical scholarship because you see that, like, if with a lot of churches, if you try to question, hey, why do we believe this? Or wouldn't it make sense if we believe this? Or what about this? Or what about the doctrine of hell? Because the doctrine of hell as we know it today is not, in the Bible. So if you question things like that and your church basically silences you, then you're probably on the road to having you're in a healthy situation and a healthy relationship that could lead to trauma. And if you look back and you're like, wow, like, part of the reason that I feel unable to even be in a church or hear, like, go to a wedding or hear, hymns, and it causes me to have panic attacks. I know people that are like that. They can't even walk into a church building for something without having a panic attack because of some of those unhealthy behaviors. Then you probably have some sort of religious trauma.
Yeah, there's actually, in the LGBTQ community, there's something that we describe as internalized homophobia.
Right.
And and for me, it was a lot of, I was taught that being gay was a sin, and that if you had, and they use this really awful term, same-sex attraction, that was a temptation, right? And so you needed to deal with the temptation, right? So they went from identity to sort of action and temptation. And so because people aren't gay, right? That's not an identity. That's a choice and something you do. And so when you internalize those things, it makes it really difficult to claim your identity, to say to yourself, oh, wait a second, I am, because that's not an option for you, right? That's not a thing. And anytime your identity begins to express itself in attraction, it is, oh, wow, I don't need to look at that guy. I need to look at a girl, right? I don't, right? It's that, like, every time that identity comes up, it's treated as a temptation to do something. And so then you begin these remedies of not of trying to change what you were doing and what you were thinking, and ultimately, a lot of people end up crying at night, crying out to God, God, take this away. I can't do this on my own, or just completely ignoring it, and having that existential turmoil that is being suppressed, and I feel like, and I guess I want to ask you, if somebody has experienced that, is that an indication of religious trauma?
Absolutely is. And I mean, of course, it's something I hear all the time within the group that I facilitate on Tuesdays. Stories like that all the time.
Yeah.
Because the majority of the group is LGBTQ plus, although it's expanded out. There are people who are atheists that became atheists because they were allies and saw how that a lot of their friends were treated, the same way that you just described.
Yeah.
And they've kind of had trauma from that, people that they've, grew up with, people that they viewed as their, extended family that have been treated certain ways. And sometimes even leading to, unaliving, situations where, So
I wonder, on the purity culture side of things, I also grew up in purity culture. So and some of the stories that I hear in my community is people, they were taught, some of the things that you were talking about, when it was internalized, there was a shame of your body, right? Women would feel like some part of their body was almost evil because it would cause a man to sin. And so they were ashamed of it. They would cover it up. They would hide it. For young men, the idea of, they were also sometimes shamed because of their body, because toxic masculinity was part of it. But they would, I know that I internalized it as really any sort of sexual arousal or attraction that was sin, that was evil. When now I realize that that's just completely natural. It's part of being a human, and especially an adolescent male. And so I guess sort of the same question: if people have experienced that, is that also an indication of religious trauma?
It is. And when you said that, kind of reminded me of, of course, obviously this is done in jest, but it reminded me of an episode of The Righteous Gemstones, where, Danny McBride's son, is caught, masturbating, basically.
Right.
And so, he basically shames him by saying, every time you do that, everybody in heaven that you've ever known is watching you. And is that, and it sounds like it's satire, but that's the type of stuff that's said in these households.
Right. So, obviously, I think people who have experienced religious trauma, therapy. How do you find a therapist? Well, I guess two things. How do you find a therapist that knows anything to do? And then B, what do you need to look for as a red flag for a therapist that you definitely don't want to go to deal with this?
Yeah, and that's red flags are all over East Texas, by the way.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that. What are the red flags when you're looking at a therapist's website or Psychology Today description? What are some warning signs?
Well, not so much warning signs, but I can tell you what to look for.
Okay, that's what I mean.
There are, look for in regards to that's the therapist I want.
Oh, okay.
And I would say a lot of them that are safe will say they're affirming.
Okay, good.
they may not necessarily use that exact language. They may say, LGBTQ plus friendly, but essentially they'll be affirming. And so that's something I've had to look for with all, with my kids here in East Texas. Here in East Texas, we have Mosaic, which our Episcopal Church has a partnership with. So,
what is Mosaic?
They're very aware of religious trauma.
What is Mosaic?
Mosaic is a counseling center based here in Tyler, Texas.
Okay.
So they are one of the very few affirming, counseling centers in the East Texas area. Mm-hmm. So we actually have a partnership with them through our church. So anybody who, desires to go to therapy or feels the need to go to therapy, our church will actually, we have a program. If you don't even have to be a member of the church, you just have to, come here, talk to the vicar, but we actually have a program to where you can actually get sessions with them for free.
Oh, that's great.
Or a discounted rate, depending on, your financial situation. So, so that's a safe place. And again, they promote themselves as being a safe place.
Right.
And
okay.
That's really what I would look for, is a place that's promoting themselves as a safe place, because, a lot of times you'll go in there and, it's not publicly advertised on their website, but, it ends up becoming a very evangelical, coded therapy session.
Okay. And that's one side. You obviously run this really great support group, and I'm sure that there's, people Google, they can find support groups. I also think, like, I've got this group called Not Church.
Right.
And Not Church is this really, I don't know, it's this beautiful place where a lot of people there, maybe all of them, have experienced religious trauma. There are queer people and straight people there. There are people of all different religious identities. They're all still spiritual, and they want to find, like, spiritual beliefs and practices to engage with, to connect with the divine or the universe or whatever they call it. But it's like a non-judgmental place that, like, nobody's telling them they're going to hell because they.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is really interesting that I have observed is, like, when people say things that I know other people disagree with, the people who disagree with them don't argue. They end up, having this posture of learning, like saying, like, oh, wow, that's a phrase I don't have in my tradition. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I find, at least in our group, that having a group of people that you can constantly hear their stories, ask their perspective in a way that's they're not going to give, where you don't have to worry about them being dogmatic, is so, so helpful.
Oh, I would agree. And there's something else you said a minute ago that really stood out to me when I started running this group, which is, where people are searching for a connection of spirituality without being judged. That was something that surprised me with this group, because with religious trauma, you would think they wouldn't want anything to do with religion. Yeah. That's actually been the opposite. Yeah. We initially wanted to keep any of those type of discussions out and just kind of listen. But as we started doing series, or these different series, what we found was they were really interested in deconstruction.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they want a connection with God, however they view him. Even there's a couple atheists that go to the group and are just like, I just want to connect with spirituality. I enjoy Jesus and his teachings.
Yeah.
I just don't like how they've been used. So,
right. Yeah. And if people listening to podcasts are interested in checking that out, one of the things that there's been a lot of trauma around in that group is people being manipulated out of money. And so because of that, like, one of the ways that churches do this is saying that a tithe, 10% of your income, is something that the Bible says needs to happen, which is not accurate.
Right.
But because of that, we actually don't accept donations. Everything we do, from the courses that we do to pastoral meetings to our Not Church group, are pay for what you get. And so if people want to try it out, it's $3 a month. And if it doesn't work for you, you just stop paying. And you can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor. That's patreon.com/skepticpastor. There's going to be a link in the show notes here. And that'll get you access to the Not Church group. And we're also not trying to be part of some sort of capitalist systemic injustice where people with expendable income are preferenced over others. So if there's some reason that $3 is too much, we get that. And you can just reach out, and we have a way to get people in for free as well. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate you being here. This has been really helpful.
No, I appreciate you having me. And hopefully, as we continue with this research, we'll be able to bridge that gap and come up with an action plan to help fill in some of those things that you brought up, like, whether it's counseling, or just having the church do better. I think that's the biggest thing.
And once you finish that dissertation, I'd love to have you back on and hear all of the fascinating things that you found out.
Absolutely. I would love to.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.